aborting more than 1 of every 4 pregnancies, creating human clones, eliminating our elderly with euthanasia. Is this how we should deal with human life? Find out how you can make a difference in changing our culture in this edition of Life Matters. Brian Johnston is the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters. We're your program on the right to life, on the culture that emanates from that idea that every human being is unique and special. There's a culture that comes from that premise. Again, it's a premise that was put into America's foundation, that we hold this to be a self-evident truth, that every human being is unique and endowed by their Creator, not endowed by the government or by people with power, but by the Maker of all things, and made unique. There's an entire culture that comes out of that idea. And the corollary on the other side, the opposite idea, the absence of that idea, the notion that human beings are things, the idea that maybe, we're just animals. There's an entire culture that comes out of that. And these two cultures are at war. And that creates the battle of ideas, important ideas that are at stake that have grave implications because ideas matter. And if you're not prepared for this battle, it's very easy for you to be lured and to succumb to some bad ideas. So our program is here to help equip you. And one of the things we're going to talk about today, we're going to visit with a very knowledgeable man, very down to earth, but a very intelligent gentleman, Dr. David Prentice. Dr. Prentice is an expert on bioethics and in particular on microbiology and genetics. And he's going to talk to us today about the whole phenomenon of cloning and stem cell research. A lot of people, their eyes will glaze. Don't worry, he's very down to earth. He will talk about things he's written on a board here. This is an excerpt from the National Right to Life Convention. And David gave a workshop there. He'll give another one this year. But it's important for you to realize that the whole research on stem cells is moving forward. And let me tell you this, I'm actually a fan of stem cells and using stem cells, if they're mine. Because, in fact, you have stem cells in your body right now that are designed to help you and to help heal you, and they're used by your body all the time. So good science wants to understand how that works. And there is a whole world of science right now in terms of the effective use and the medical use of your own stem cells. Dr. Prentice will get into that. But more to the point, if human beings are things, then the stem cells of other things is something that scientism wants to use. And as you recall, we refer to scientism is the notion that somehow science in and of itself is a moral guide, that science in and of itself can teach truth. And that is actually an error. It's not true science. Science is a tool. It's a tool to understanding and to help us build things, if you will, in our understanding and in our culture. But science does not have in itself moral value any more than any other tool, a hammer or a chisel. It's how those tools are used that determine their moral quality. So you're going to hear from Dr. David Prentice. I want to urge you to pay attention. And as he talks about what's on the board, visualize what he's saying, and you'll find it really is very helpful.
Stem cells and cloning and some of these things that a lot of people go, oh yeah, I know all about that. And then you actually try and drill down, you find out most people don't really know the details. In fact, I give talks at grand rounds to physicians where half of the physicians really don't know the basic facts about stem cells. So we're going to do a little Stem Cell 101, kind of give you some basics, different types of stem cells, but we are going to end up with some real positive news that adult stem cells, as it says, are saving lives now. A couple of other things I'd really encourage you to go to, stemcellresearchfacts.org. And a couple of other little shameless promotional announcements. We've put together a little pamphlet called Stem Cells, Cloning, and Human Embryos that you can get online as a PDF, or you can get a hard copy from the Family Research Council website at frc.org. And we'll be mentioning cloning on July 17th we'll have a policy lecture at Family Research Council with Representative Andy Harris from Maryland, and talking about, again, basic facts, in particular about cloning, but also Andy's bill to prohibit human cloning. Okay, so with all of that, let's do some talk about basics about stem cells and cloning and so on. And here are some phrases you've probably heard over and over again. Former Senator Specter, embryonic stem cells are a fountain of youth, and they have the potential to cure all known maladies. And when I heard that, I thought, well, what about dandruff? Or halitosis? Former Speaker of the House, Pelosi, science has taken us to a place that is biblical in its power to cure, and that's embryonic stem cell research. We're saying it's the answer to our prayers. Current National Institutes of Health Director Francis Collins. It's important life-saving research. Now, I'm an old professor. I like to give pop quizzes. How many lives have been saved with embryonic stem cell research? Zero, none, nada, not a single one. They've been doing embryonic stem cell research first in mice and then with humans in the lab. A very, very few patients injected, no lives saved, nobody improved. In fact, in over 30 years of embryonic stem cell research, there aren't that many mice that have been helped with embryonic stem cells. In fact, it's a little bit more like this. So all of these little ones are coming to the pearly gates, and St. Peter goes, partial birth abortion. And one of them says, no, stem cell research, meaning embryonic stem cell research. In fact, we don't have a real good handle, but there are millions and millions of human embryos that have been destroyed in the process of human embryonic stem cell research. We need to hang our hats on some basic biology, and that's actually what this is. This is from one of the two leading scientific journals in the world. The title says it all, Your Destiny from Day One. So at the point of conception, fertilization, you're a human being. That embryo will grow and continue to grow unless you stop that process somehow. Here's another sort of misnomer, misidentification about stem cells. A lot of people think you're going to go into Stem Cell Depot, like you go into Home Depot, and go into the parts department and ask for your part and model number. Hey, you got a femur for a 57 Caucasian? Yeah. You got a heart for a 69 model? Well, in most cases, that's not what we're talking about when we talk about stem cell research or treatments. You're not going to grow an organ in a dish and then go in and kind of trade out parts like you would an automobile. There are a few cases, and we'll mention those, with adult stem cells where some of that is starting to take place. But for the most part, that's not what's going on. Instead, it's this, what's termed regenerative medicine now. And you'll hear that phrase more and more, especially because most people don't like to talk about stem cells. But in this case, adult stem cells from bone marrow being placed into a heart that was damaged after a heart attack and regenerating, repairing or replacing the damaged tissue. More Stem Cell 101. Any stem cell we talk about has two chief characteristics that make it a stem cell by definition. Some of these cells keep growing and dividing, so you always have a pool, a collection of those cells available. And that's true whether we're talking about it in our body or in the lab. And then the arrow is going to the right where it says committed and differentiated or specialized cells. You give a stem cell the right signal, and that's what it will do. It will specialize into various specialized types of tissues. And there are different sources for stem cells. So we start over here as a single-celled embryo. We continue to grow and develop, and after about a week, this is what you and I look like. What's called a blastocyst, technically. It looks like a hollow ball with some cells inside. But, a show of hands of anybody in here who was never an embryo. Okay? Basic biology fact number 2. We've all been through these various stages of life, but you have to destroy that young human life to get embryonic stem cells. You can get stem cells from fetal tissue, and at birth, even though babies aren't adults, we usually call them adult stem cells. So your tissues and organs, you're born with those cells, adult stem cells in your body. Umbilical cord blood, the solid part of the cord, the placental tissue, the amniotic fluid, also is a source of adult stem cells. You don't have to be 21 years of age to own an adult stem cell. You're born with them. Now, what about those embryonic? Well, here's a quote from Dr. James Thompson, who was the one who originally grew human embryonic stem cells in the lab in 1998. And he's being very honest. This is from an interview in 2007. Major roadblocks remain before human embryonic stem cells can be transplanted into humans to cure disease or replace injured body parts. Few problems along the way, like learning how to grow the cells into the things you need and making sure that cancer and other defects are not introduced. Because let's face it, one of the basic characteristics of embryonic stem cells that makes them interesting to a lab scientist, they like to grow. You can grow lots and lots and lots of them. But stopping that growth is a problem. And getting them to behave and form the tissues you want is a problem. And in fact, they have been pretty much unsuccessful at doing that with embryonic stem cells. Now, Jamie thinks it's decades away, but eventually that they'll be able to solve that problem. Another interview with him, and I like to use Jamie because he's an honest scientist, saying, well, I'm not really even focusing on treatments with embryonic stem cells because scientists have overestimated the prospects for transplantation cures. What's he doing? He's growing the cells in the lab, and he's using them for testing drugs and just doing basic scientific research in the lab, not even thinking about transplants. And in fact, and I'll come back to this in a moment, he no longer uses embryonic stem cells. He's using a different type of stem cell that doesn't require destroying young human life. So why are scientists still interested in embryonic stem cells? Well, Kevin Egan at Harvard, I think, says it best. States will pour more money into this research and we'll all get more money. There's a real economic incentive to try and convince people that this is where you're going to get all those cures. Embryonic stem cells. Just bring on the money. We'll bring you the cures. There's a company that actually did a human clinical trial, 5 patients total, with spinal cord injury injected with human embryonic stem cells. January 2009, this company called Geron, FDA approval to start the first clinical trial. Now, in point of fact, the FDA turned right around and put them on a hold because they were worried about safety, and it was a year and a half before they ever injected the first patient. But they got what they were really after. Their stock price went up. Economic incentive again. And in fact, a year and a half later, they started injecting a few patients and then within a year stopped the whole trial, even though they said they had $250 million available to do this trial. They wanted to get out while the getting was good before anybody had a problem. No patients improved. Ian Wilmot is Dolly the clone sheep's daddy, you might say. He was the one that cloned Dolly years ago. He originally was interested in embryonic stem cells and cloning of human beings. Not too long ago, though, he went into California and said, we ought to just give up human embryonic stem cell research. It's not working. It's expensive. There are better things to do than embryonic stem cells and cloning. Well, it turns out California actually listened to that. Not because of any ethical reason. Let's not fool ourselves here. But back a number of years ago, California citizens passed a bond issue, actually a constitutional amendment, to put $3 billion state taxpayer dollars into embryonic stem cell research and cloning over a period of 10 years. That's what they started to do.
Life Matters continues after this.
You're pretty amazing. The reason I can say that is America's founders said that about you. That's right. They said that every human being is created by a creator and given rights by that creator. Those rights are not given by the government. It's the government's job to protect those rights. And the very first and most important is the right to be alive, the right to life. If you want to be involved in the national effort, go to NRLC.org.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
So we're back, and you're listening to Life Matters. We're going to hear Dr. Prentice again. He's talking about the red bar and the blue bar, which are diagrams that he's pointing out. The red bar represents the use of stem cells from human children, fetuses. The blue bar actually represents the amount of successes found in the use of stem cell research. And that has to do with ones that really work. Those are adult stem cells, not fetal stem cells. So back to Dr. David Prentice.
The red bar is the money that they started to put into embryonic. And if you'll notice, it went way down, and this blue bar comes up, which is adult stem cells, non-embryonic stem cells. even though they needed a supermajority of votes to start putting the money towards adult, pragmatically they decided if we really want to show any results from embryonic stem cells, we need to be putting it into adult stem cells, not embryonic. Maryland, similar situation. Tens of millions of dollars every year, and now, in this case, red is the adult stem cells. In fact, this was 2013. I think this year they didn't even fund a single embryonic stem cell grant. So the science, even the ideologically type of science, is going towards adult stem cells and away from embryonic. Now, where were they getting these embryonic stem cells? Well, I think this kind of shows it. They're looking at these little frozen embryos and going, they're all carrying pro-life signs. I think, in a sense, that's real. But they were after these little so-called leftover frozen embryos at the IVF clinics. And we didn't know for years how many there were. Turns out there were 400,000 little frozen ones at these IVF clinics. And they were saying, well, just give us all those. Well, it turns out when the RAND Corporation did a survey, most of those embryos that people wanted to keep for what they called family building. They knew these were their embryonic children. There were only a few of these embryos available for research. And so they said, well, we'll take all of those, but we're going to need more. In fact, we're going to need thousands or millions of embryos if we ever want to make this work. We're going to have to start making embryos specifically for research, including by cloning. I want to show you a picture of a couple of frozen embryos, well, former frozen embryos, Luke and Mark Borden here. Here they are, just after they were thawed, when they were still embryos, in the Petri dish. Here they are a few months later. These are the same individuals. Lucinda and John were testifying at a House of Representatives hearing, and Lucinda finished her testimony, showed the picture of Luke and Mark as embryos, and John stood up with Luke and Mark in his arms and said, so which one of my sons would you kill for research? And you could have heard a pin drop in that hearing room. But it makes the point that these are the same individuals, just a few months older, that you would propose to destroy for research. And they don't go bad in the freezer like a steak does. Turns out, and this was the latest reference I could find, almost 20 years, but as far as we know, there's no upper limit. So you don't have to thaw them out and destroy them for research to, quotes, save them. They're fine. We do need to figure out what to do with them. Whole separate lecture to talk about there. But, these individuals are okay in the freezer. Let's talk about cloning for a bit in terms of making embryos and making people. And this is the science fiction view again. You're not going to walk down the street and all of a sudden find your clone. You have to start again as an embryo. So let's contrast. Now, here's the old-fashioned way to make an embryo. Egg and sperm put together. It's called fertilization. You might have heard of it. We've been doing it for quite a while as a species. You get a single-celled embryo, and that embryo can go ahead and grow and divide. Well, cloning, the technical term is somatic cell nuclear transfer, or SCNT. Now, before your eyes spin, you need to remember this term, somatic cell nuclear transfer, because for the most part, most people aren't going to talk about, I want to do cloning. They're going to say, no, I want to do somatic cell nuclear transfer on you to get stem cells for cures. Most people gloss that science phrase, but they heard cure, right? What I said is I'm going to clone her, and then I'm going to kill her clone, her genetic twin sister in a sense, for experiments, for science fair experiments. So somatic cell nuclear transfer. You hear that term, you think, cloning. But it describes what you do. You remove the chromosomes, remove the nucleus from an egg, and you transfer the nucleus from a somatic cell. That's a body cell, like a skin cell. Transfer the nucleus into that egg that's had its nucleus removed. There's your clone, a single-celled embryo, which can also grow ahead and grow and divide, just like the one made by fertilization. Cloning's back. We hadn't heard about cloning and attempts to make human clones in years, but a little over a year ago, this scientist in Oregon announced he had successfully made cloned human embryos. Human cloning has occurred. Not only that, but what he did was he was able to make them healthy enough as cloned embryos that they could grow a few days, and then he could kill them and keep their stem cells, their embryonic stem cells, growing. This year, just a few months ago, some scientists in California, collaborating with Korean scientists, also did this, and then a scientist in New York State was able to do it. So there have been some recent examples. It's coming back. Now, it's interesting, though, you listen to some of the things they're saying now, they're not pushing it as hard as this is a way to make embryonic stem cells for cures. But you're still going to hear that phrase that we're going to cure people, we're going to clone you, we're going to make embryonic stem cells. They're not really going to talk about cloning. They'll say somatic cell. There you go. Okay. SCNT. Somatic cell nuclear transfer for stem cells for cures. Just to reemphasize, this is how you got Dolly the cloned sheep and all those cloned animals you keep hearing about. They took a sheep egg and took out its chromosomes and transferred the nucleus, somatic cell nuclear transfer, which means?
Cloning.
Okay, yeah, there we go. You got a single-celled embryo. You're done cloning right there. Now it's just what do you do with that clone? If you put it into the womb of a surrogate mother for a live birth, hello, Dolly. You're after a live-born clone. And that's sometimes termed reproductive cloning. If you kill that clone and break it apart to put its cells in the dish for these experiments, therapeutic cloning. Boy, it sounds good. Except it's not therapeutic for the embryo. The embryo dies. Oh, and there aren't any therapies from it either. You got to have a lot of eggs to make this work. It's a real inefficient science, so we need lots of women to give lots of eggs. This is an actual ad that was in a Washington, D.C. newspaper a few years ago. Now, notice how it phrased. Which comes first, the egg or the cure? We're going to cure all these diseases. Diabetes, heart disease, the list goes on and on. Doesn't your heart just break? Don't you want to participate in this? We need women 21 to 35 years old to donate eggs for stem cell research. We're not going to say we're making clones. We're going to make stem cells for cures, remember. Don't you want to be part of the cure? In some cases, they're actually paying young women to come donate their eggs. They sort of neglect the little problems that go along with it. But you think about it, what a lure. If you're a college student, you get tuition, money for books, somebody that needs extra money. Calla Papademos answered one of those ads. She calls herself a survivor. She never saw or talked to a doctor. She talked to a nurse through the egg broker. Literally, that's what they're called, an egg broker. They promised her $7,000 if she delivered a certain number of eggs. There was actually a quota she had to meet to get her payment. UPS package on her doorstep with the hormones to inject herself with to stimulate egg production, and an 800 number to call if you had any trouble. So after the first injection, bad headache. Called up the 800 number. Oh, that's normal. Just go ahead. It'll go away. Second day, second injection, terrible migraine. Drew the drapes, turned off the lights, called the 800 number to talk to the nurse. Everybody goes through that. Just keep going. You've got to be able to deliver in terms of your eggs. Third day, third injection, woke up 6 weeks later from her coma in the hospital. Some young women have died. Others have had long-lasting problems in terms of losing their own fertility, potential problems with cancer. Calla has a little problem in her brain. She says, every year when I get my annual MRI, I can see the dead spot in my brain. So oftentimes the fertility clinics will say, we've never had a problem, or the research clinics, whatever. But anywhere from 10 to 20% of women who undergo this super ovulation, high hormone therapy, have some sort of problem. And in fact, a friend, Jennifer Law, has put this little documentary together, Eggsploitation. And it sounds funny, but then it goes through and it talks to several young women who did experience problems. Some of them almost died, and the mother of a young lady who did die after the treatment. Okay, if you can't get enough human eggs, well, let's play with animal eggs then. So in the UK, they're looking at human-animal hybrids or chimeras. Animal egg with human nucleus or DNA. I think you get, like a cow egg and human DNA, you get a cowboy, right? Maybe not. Even in the U.S., the FDA has recently been talking about 3-parent embryos. Again, needing extra eggs. We're going to start doing these weird sort of combinations. Now, it's interesting, the people who are promoting the 3-parent embryo research in the U.S. are the cloners. The scientists in New York, the scientists in Oregon, the scientists in California. It's virtually the same technique. They want cloning and they want it approved. If you look out across the world, there are a lot of countries that have actually banned SCNT cloning. So, we often hear this, it's just those conservative religious zealots that don't want this, right? Well, conservative religious countries like France, Canada, Germany, and that bastion of conservatism, the UN, have all banned legislatively or at least put together documents and declarations against cloning. The U.S. is one of the few left in the world that's still legal to do. Court of Justice in the European Union basically saying, look, it's a human being, and we shouldn't be patenting or using human beings in experiments like this.
Well, that was Dr. David Prentice speaking at the National Right to Life Convention. It's important for you to recognize he is just touching the surface. We could easily spend an hour talking about cloning and the implications of human cloning. We could spend another hour talking about chimeras or chimeras, which is the combination, the unnatural combination of species and animals, if you will. If you combined a dog and a cat, you're creating a chimera. There's incredible implications to this. Now, don't think that these ideas are only for scientists to think about or talk about. These are ideas that are afloat in the battle of ideas, and it's the laws that are ideas that are enforced. Many nations, as Dr. Prentice has pointed out, have banned the use of human cloning, have banned creating chimeras, and there's good reason for that. So it isn't up to the scientists to do whatever they want. Again, that is scientism. Science is not its own moral arbiter, and to think that if something can be done, it should be done, is a serious, serious moral error. It's a moral error created many times in the past, most obviously in the case of the Nazis, brilliant scientists who did wrong things with science. I want to remind you that if you can, try to get to the National Right to Life Convention. This is just one example of the in-depth workshops and the preparation that's offered for you so that you can have a better understanding of what this right to life is all about, and you can bring it back to your home county, your state, and you can impact others so that they're thinking right about these things. Go to NRLconvention.com and you can find out how to sign up. The prices are kept low. You're going to meet some amazing people there and have a great time. So make sure you check your calendar and go to NRLconvention.com. And throughout the year, be sure to go to NRLC.org to find out more about the battle of ideas and protecting the right to life.
To follow Life Matters on all social media, go to lifematters.life, where you will find everything you need to know to share life, culture, and the battle of ideas with everyone you care about. Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life.